Okay, so this is the economic development meeting, and I will call it to order today, now. An agenda here, or would you want me to kind of guide this discussion?
I think you can just guide it, Ben. I think obviously this is, from my perspective, this was sort of the follow-up to Graham's presentation. I guess Graham, when was it? April 27th? I think I got the date right. And there was some discussion about how the city and Magic could sort of work more closely together to sort of cross-promote. I think, Ben, the other thing, which, Graham, I don't know that I mentioned this to you, but one of the things since we were having this call anyway is I thought it would be a good opportunity for everyone to sort of talk about the program metrics that are in the grant agreement to see if we wanted to change any of those, because I will need to get a grant agreement, Graham, on the Mayor and Common Council meeting agenda sometime in June, just so everything's in place by July 1st. So my suggestion, Ben, is maybe you start with the more kind of global discussion about, the Silicon Main Street initiative and just how we could all work more closely together. And then after you finish that discussion, if we could talk a little bit about the grant program metrics.
Sure. Yeah, so I'll kind of really want to turn it over to Graham. I mean, what I heard in the last presentation is you feel like that we should have a better cohesive strategy, and that, you have worked with the county and among other organizations. So I'd be interested to hear, okay, what is your vision for that? What does it look like? What do you need from us? And then we can just kind of expand on that discussion.
Yes, thank you. And essentially, I've been reading up on what different organizations recommend in terms of formalizing or crystallizing an economic development plan, and so I kind of started with that type of information that I would get from like the Kauffman Foundation, for example, and there are a couple studies done. One was called Start Us Up, America's New Business Plan. And then Bloomberg Philanthropies had one with Organization for Economic Cooperation Development in a white paper called Enhancing Innovation Capacity in City Government. And the things that these two papers have in common are four things. They say that local governments and municipalities need to state their innovation strategies and communicate that plan to their entire community. Kind of like what I think Councilman Dayhoff was also indicating on one of the meetings where we discussed this about like branding it, like having like a brand for the economic development mission. I think so that seems to be something that I'm seeing throughout the research that I've done as well. The second point is that there should be a strategic leader, a staff member or organization assigned to executing on that plan. That can be from within the city. It could be a consultant. It can be, an organization like Magic, if need be. And then the third one is cities should adopt open data policies using the same data to identify problems and to then measure success. I think that's going to be one of the key first steps, is identifying what are the metrics of success that we can measure, that would be meaningful, that would say to you guys that this economic development plan, whatever it's called, would have been successful over what period of time. And then the fourth point is that they say innovation requires funding, whether it be from grants or streamlined access to capital for startups. So, in some way, shape, or form, and obviously that's part of my agenda at Magic is to invest in startups, to provide something to startups that helps bring them here, whether it's these tax credits or grants or something like that, that maybe it's the state or the county that needs to offer that, or if it's small amounts of grant funding that can be available to individual businesses that apply for whatever program. So those are the four main points that I have gleaned from these two different studies that were done by two different organizations. And then the economic development vision that I articulated to City Council, I had called it Silicon Main Street because when I was first hired by Magic or interviewing for the job at Magic, and they asked me to present to them, what would you do if you were in this role? And I identified, well, you're starting with this sort of universal problem of Main Street America, that Main Street America faces. And what are all those economic development challenges? Now, I didn't know enough about the city of Westminster to be able to say at that time, it's these metrics, like, is it truancy? Is it poor health outcomes? Is it, a real estate metric of some sort? And then, what can a Main Street American town do to improve upon those metrics? And as it related to, technology infrastructure, like what Westminster is able to offer its citizens through fiber, I thought, well, technology-driven economic development plan seems to make sense, because we've already taken these steps in terms of providing that infrastructure. And then what does that look like? And so that then started in my own mind drawing analogies, comparisons to Silicon Valley, just because I've been out there. I've been in other communities that have adopted that moniker, like Silicon Prairie in the Midwest and Silicon Alley in New York City. And it's sort of like an overused term, but when you think about all the elements that went into growing what is now today Silicon Valley, when you think about all those elements, we have all those elements here. They just are sort of like, no one really knows that they're all there all at the same time. And perhaps Magic's role, goes back to my initial presentation to Magic's board. The Magic's role was to pull those things together, to sort of be that glue, to make it more of a concerted effort between multiple stakeholders. And those ingredients, as I articulated in the last council meeting with my presentation, are, low cost of living, high quality of life. That's essential. Then you've got the presence of defense contractors who are investing in opportunities in that region. That was a key ingredient in Silicon Valley. And then you've got institutions of higher learning that are helping with the workforce development. They're providing some of the research and development and workforce development for those technologies. And we're starting to see that with McDaniel, but we've certainly been seeing that with the community college with their associate's degree programs and certifications in cybersecurity and drone aviation and things like that. So all these things together, I think it's more appropriate for us to sort of say, hey, we're the Silicon Main Street community, because we actually have all those ingredients, whereas like a Silicon Alley in New York, they don't really have the low cost of living, high quality of life, ratio that we have, or that Silicon Valley originally had. So I think it's more deserving of our community to use that moniker than anything else. So that's where that Silicon Main Street name came from. And I apologize for background noise. My kids are all home. So.
I'm hiding upstairs because my 4-year-old is wild right now playing a Jurassic Park Lego game.
I've got 5 kids. There's no hiding in my house. They find me.
Imagine. Jeez, yeah.
Yeah. So I just did a lot of talking. So maybe I'm happy to pause there if there's anything that I said you guys want to dig into. And if not, I mean, yeah, go ahead. Was that somebody?
Yeah, I'm here. So
okay.
I guess so. I actually like the fact that you kind of were very clear, with the 4 areas of kind of putting together a strategy. So I guess we maybe need to ask ourselves, what is Magic's kind of role in this? Because I a staff leader, for example, I mean, and correct me if I'm wrong. I mean, look, stating an innovation strategy, I think now it's not easy, but I think that's doable. I mean, and what I'm hearing is that should be done between the city and you, or Magic, or the city should do it ourselves. I mean,
I think the city, yeah, I think it should be something that I think the city owns, so to speak. And I think I've only sort of interjected Magic into that just because I felt like that was something we could help with. But ideally, if the city had had that role, well, certainly the communication of that needs to come from the city, I think, in terms of getting the larger, the citizens on board with it as well. So yeah, I would recommend that if it's possible to have the city have this be their economic development plan, whatever ends up being called or whatever it ends up being consisting of. But all the research I've done says that it should be something that the city sort of owns and that the city communicates.
So I'm going to skip over staff leader because I'm going to come back to it. Open data policies, identify problem, measure, open data, or is that where you're talking about like the metrics?
Right, yeah, and I think the open data part of it sort of implies that there needs to be transparency that other, I assume citizens could then verify the data. So I don't know what kind of open data infrastructure the city has currently, but there are certainly like larger cities that have like these kind of smart city programs where they make the government, the federal government has opendata.gov or something like that. And so there's some data out there that I would imagine that is electronic in nature that could be, consolidated into a dashboard of some sort. Maybe there's an effort. Maybe that's a whole different effort that warrants its own conversation. But if there is data available, if there are data available, making them accessible to the public also, I think, is a key part of the openness of that. But the reason why it's there to begin with is to serve as like, what are the key performance indicators that measure the success of any economic development plan? And so in our case, like, we would have to decide what those are. Is it number of homes sold in the city of Westminster? Is it business tax revenue increasing? And if so, where are those data and who has access to them?
We're in an odd spot here with economic development for a couple of reasons. Water is a stopping point for us. So we have to be, that doesn't mean we can't attract other businesses here, but we need to attract businesses that don't have the water needs. And we have, office space and stuff like that people can move into without having an increase in need for water. But I guess it makes it easy to have an economic development plan when the economic development plan is to get usable water and to free up sewer capacity, because we have more businesses that are trying to come in than we can allow, which is that's a good problem to have, but a bad problem that keeps it from happening. But we have more people and people want to build houses that than can. One thing keep in mind is you did bring up some residential growth. This is something you may have not, since our discussions are almost always about business. One thing you may not know is that one of the reasons that our water allocation plan gives almost no water at all to new construction homes, like one per year inside the city and one per year outside, is because we have, and I don't know if the exact number now, but at least as of like a year ago, we have over 600 homes that are slated to be built. They already have water. They just haven't been built yet. So we have residential growth already kind of queued up, as a significant, percentage of a city that has in the 6,000-ish range residences here. We have 10% of those, and they are nicer homes, larger homes, more expensive homes for the most part, specifically in the Stonegate area of the city. Are you familiar when I say Stonegate? Do you know what I'm talking about, Graham?
Yes, across 97, right?
Yeah, so like on the edge of town. It wasn't the city until they decided to build houses there, and it was annexed in. But so it is right on the edge. But yes, I just wanted to make sure you knew, where I was talking about. But so but here the beautiful thing about it is the types of businesses that we can promote to come here that don't take up additional water, and they use commercial office space that already has water allocations, are office types of businesses. Tech businesses fall into that. I mean, I know there's some tech manufacturing that could be a little more problematic at the moment, but so I guess the point is in terms of the narrative and the storyline that we're always looking for when it comes to like an economic development plan. It's hard to come up with something or to come up with something that is meaningful and isn't just fluff when your real economic development plan is to get water and free up sewer capacity, or you can't do anything else. So I'm just sharing. I'm sharing what our economic development plan has been, Greg, with Graham here, which is just get water and sewer capacity, because we have people beating down the door. I mean, we have a very positive problem in people wanting to come here and to locate here, and we have very solid plans for water and sewer. They just take time. So in the meantime, there's plenty. There still is plenty of office space, and one of the things too to keep in mind is people, and you probably have already figured this out in the time that you've been here, is that you'll see we do have open office space in the city that goes unrented, but I assure you, when a nice office space is available, a nice one, it gets rented right away. So one of our things, and again, this doesn't necessarily tie to magic or technology, in my opinion, that's important for economic development and activity here in the city, is encouraging people to invest money in those properties. When you see someone invest some money into the my company's a perfect example. We found a newly renovated building in the city, and it had like polished concrete floors, and there wasn't a lot like that. We jumped right on it. And now as we grow, I'm going to have to probably buy a building, because it's hard to tell your staff you're going to move into something that's not as nice as where you are now. But we have people, I think, that have had buildings for a long time, and they're reluctant to put kind of money into a building that's going to take years and years to kind of recoup back. We do have some newer landlords and some turnover that in properties that has spurred some of that. But I know for a fact, if we could incentivize people one way or the other to invest money into their buildings, then those buildings would fill. They'd fill with businesses, for sure.
And those are good points, because essentially I would see them from a data science perspective. I would see those two metrics, so to speak, the availability of renovated, nice, newer office space, and the water allocation issues as being confounders in the data, where it's like, okay, the water allocation may negatively or positively impact growth separate from Silicon Main Street, right? And so same with renovating real estate investments. So it could be that these are three different plans in place. Maybe Silicon Main Street, as I called it, is simply what is now encompasses fiber and technology-driven economic development, as opposed to encompassing everything to include water allocation or real estate. Maybe it's like three different plans.
They are, but in my opinion, they're tied together for the. I mean, obviously, water's, that's tied into everything, especially getting like tech manufacturing and so forth. But the office space, I brought that up specifically. I think that's important when you're talking about tech companies and innovation. They want fun office spaces, and if you look at mine, or you go to why am I blanking right now? They're a great addition to the city. They're in the mall right now.
Scale.
Yeah, Scale. I don't know why. I've been in their office multiple times, and it's and they want to do they did some nice things with their office, and people want that. Tech companies don't want to be they don't want to go in an office that has wood paneling, and brown carpet. They want to go into a space that's got a younger, more modern feel to it, or newer, more modern feel, not younger really, but I just so I think that's very much tied to what you'd be trying to do. If we have a narrative and a story that's trying to get tech companies here, we need office space, or at least potential office space. They need to at least see the potential in it, because no new fresh tech company wants to move into an old stale office.
Well, and I talked to Chris, their CEO, about why they chose that spot. And he said it was the affordability of the space, being that it was in this section of the mall. I think it was part of a Chinese restaurant originally. He was talking about the amount of grease they had to remove.
I had too many meals there
to renovate that. And he said it was the gigabit fiber. The fact that they were able to run the gigabit fiber there And that's the same I heard from DDT in the Longwell building, that they're here as well because of the fiber. And I think that, yeah, there are these early adopters who have a familiarity already with Westminster, who can see a vision for the spaces that they're entering. But you're right, it's different from taking somebody who has no frame of reference or history with Westminster and trying to get them to move here. Might be worth, you know, even sort of surveying some companies. Hold on a second, I gotta take this off.
Hold on, can you still hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Sorry, I had to switch. My headset battery died. Autonomous ID. They moved into the Overton Center building, and they were originally talking about moving out by the airport, I think, with some big manufacturing facility, and instead they ended up just doing some software development offices, but they're in the Overton Center. So they might be one of a few of these companies that might be worth surveying to understand, you know, as part of our own sort of feasibility study, I guess, to figure out what were the motivations, or what were the deciding factors. You know, was it just familiarity? Because I think Autonomous ID is Canadian based. So it's like, what brought them to Westminster? What originally attracted them? Was it an opportunity zone thing? Was it gigabit fiber? Those would be good things to find out.
So I think with them, I think a lot of it was, I'm not 100% sure, but the conversations I have had, the accessibility to DC. You know, they were doing some stuff, and then healthcare. You know, remember, you know, being in the healthcare industry, Maryland is like the healthcare. So I mean, I think that's why they were looking to be in Maryland, maybe not necessarily Westminster. You know, that's a more granular, different situation. But I know with scale, you know, they started here when it was just a couple of them, and then they wanted to stay here. But when they looked at the mall, when they weren't sure if we were going to be able to get fiber into the mall or not, they weren't looking at other spaces around here. I think if the mall didn't work out, I don't think they were going to be in Westminster. Because we worked hard to get fiber in the mall. What people don't realize about the mall is there were, you know, when it was just copper circuits there, it was actually fed off of 2 different like remote terminals. And the problem is the way the cabling was done in the mall, copper is all based on distance. The further you go out, the weaker the bandwidth. And once you get into the mall, the way the cable was spooled and routed to the mall, like, going through half the mall you could add miles to your cable. So the internet speed got really slow there, really fast, depending on where you were located. If you could even get a circuit, there was a shortage of available circuits there. There were businesses that moved in at a point that couldn't even get anything. They were like on a waiting list because Verizon didn't have enough copper facilities there. So if for them that was fiber or nothing, there was like no other option for them at all, for any kind of a tech company. You know, a retail business may be able to get away with whatever they could get there, but that was it. And look, the mall had extremely good deals because what they're trying to do with the mall and their plan to eventually turn that into like a hybrid indoor-outdoor mall. You know, they wanted to, they could rent that giant space for, you know, temporarily. It was a really good deal.
So I appreciate the discussion. But I want to kind of bring it back to what the agenda we're talking about. So Graham, what I'm hearing is, you know, the city and Magic then, provided that we're going to be joined at the hip, okay, should state a strategy, you know, talk about these key performance indicators, and I guess what my thoughts are at first is, it sounds to me like we need to have some sort of formalized strategic planning workshop. All right. And look, I'm a fan of, you know, I like outsiders to run a strategic plan. I mean, and look, like, you know, I don't think we need to even look that far to, you know, across the country. And I mean, it's good to understand other people's models, but like, look, like New York, California it's not Maryland. And one of the things that Joe and I did was we looked very, very closely at like Howard County. All right. And if you look at their strategic plan, I don't know if you've ever read it, but it's a fantastic strategic plan. And I think we should pretty much like try to at least mirror some of that plan, because they do it very well. So I would think that in terms of a next step is, and I mean, look, I don't know what the funding situation looks like for this. I don't know who we could reach out to, but to me, it's you need to gather your magic leadership. You need to gather the community stakeholders. Like, so you're talking about this. What was the company you mentioned? You guys are in Overton, or you need to gather those stakeholders. You need to gather the key Kenora Breaks, like the Strauss corporations, of the people who are within the city limits, and then say, what do you need? And you need to gather them from like the different sectors: manufacturing, agriculture, retail, and you need to come together and develop this together. That would be my thought. I don't know, Joe, that's exactly how Howard County did it. And I mean, Barb, you probably can speak to this a little bit. I don't mean to bring your husband into this, but your husband is involved in this, or was involved in this. So I'm not suggesting he be involved in us, but I mean, so Barb might have a perspective on that she could give us.
Yeah, Ben, you're correct. My husband's on Howard County's Economic Development Board. I think you all have a model, that you seem to like. My suggestion, if this is where the committee would like to go forward, I think, Ben, you just touched on this. I personally think that any type of, kind of strategic planning session probably is best, having that be facilitated, sort of what we did for our own strategic plan. It's obviously just sort of a more micro strategic plan because it's much more focused than the broader one. But I think if this is something that you all would like to do, I can certainly, get some names of people who might be able to serve as a facilitator. And I suspect, Ben, I can certainly check with Larry Tweel, but I'm guessing that Howard County's was, probably used a facilitator to come up with theirs, but I can certainly reach out to him and find that out.
Sure. Yeah, I'm pretty confident I would think it was.
Yeah.
So that kind of would be my thoughts on first guessing. Instead of just like throwing all this stuff around here, we really need to come together and create this cohesive, okay, let's put it on paper. And look, I'm not a strategic professional facilitator of strategic planning, Greg, Joe, Graham, chime in here.
Greg's kind of been through that before. I'd like to hear what he has to say.
Well, I've been through a lot of those exercises. I think there's a value in having somebody from outside of us facilitate them, and I think it's important that, first of all, that everybody feel like the person who's leading it doesn't have their own agenda, and secondly that there's an opportunity for everybody to participate, and it's hard to participate when you're trying to facilitate. So I think there's a lot of value in it. I don't always like having outside facilitators, but I think this is one time when I think there's a lot of value to it.
And I'm assuming that, and I don't want to, I would assume that Magic, you'd have some of your key board members involved in this, and then obviously community stakeholders. Is that the direction that, Graham, you think, or what do you think about that?
Well, at Magic, we already have a stakeholders council with just different members of the community, business community,
So who is on that council? I mean, I'm looking at your board of directors, but I'm not seeing the stakeholders, because certain organizations have board of directors who actually make the decisions, but then you have community stakeholders that believe in the mission and believe in what you're doing, that provide feedback to you and funding.
Yeah, our stakeholders council is like an advisory board, essentially. One of the first things I did when I joined Magic was I reduced the size of the board of directors and then created a new stakeholders council. So that is sort of where we can also recruit from the board of directors. But I also wanted to free up some seats for the board to bring in some venture capitalists, which we ended up doing. just to kind of make it more manageable. And the Stakeholders Council, it's a dozen or so people, people who are consultants, people who are who have independent contractors, business owners. I can get you a list of who's on it currently, but it is much more of like advocates, people who have a stake in Magic success as it relates to economic development in the city, who want to see Magic succeed because it means the city is succeeding. Sorry.
It's the way we live now, Graham. It's all right.
Yeah. So yeah, and also I just wanted to clarify too, when you asked, who do I think should be the sort of the owner of this economic development plan, and I only was sort of kind of deferring to you because, this idea of Silicon Main Street that I presented, it doesn't have to be Magic's. It can be the city's, is what I'm trying to say. But as much as the city wants Magic to actually sort of take it and run with it, we probably will anyway, because it's something we've put a lot of effort into so far. And we have these sort of 3 tent poles of objectives related to that. They might not be the same objectives that you guys prioritize. Like, I would love to see an autonomy corridor, on Main Street with autonomous shuttles. I think that would be a great calling card, along with fiber. And it's something that there's sort of an opportunity right now to be one of the first communities with like one of the largest stretches, the largest autonomy routes.
I'd like to see us do it together. I mean, I think that's the real, the real power in it, is if we're real partners in this.
Yeah, and certainly there are things that Magic will be doing anyway. That's part of our mission already for technology innovation, education, incubation. But I think some of these things really could be part of a larger economic development vision for the city, and the city could actually own it and be like, hey, we are Silicon Main Street,
Right.
And this is why we're Silicon Main Street. It's not just fiber, but it's this, and this. I think it's important for it to be technology driven, because I think that does play into the strengths of the city right now, given COVID-19, given the demands for distance learning, remote working, given that we have a technologist for a mayor, who understands these things. So it kind of makes sense to me. I don't know how water and real estate play into that, but that's sort of why I wanted to have this, why I personally am excited to have this conversation with you guys.
So when we're talking about water, and let me pivot a little bit, I want to know, you said in the last meeting that you all had a very strong, cohesive relationship with the county's economic development office. What does that look like?
No, I mean, all I was saying is that they've helped us promote. I mean, like I've talked to Denise, for example, and she directed me to like posting our press releases to the county website. And I was referring to the fact that we were getting cross promotion. That's because the county has that infrastructure, or it's part of their WordPress website where you can easily go in, upload a press release. I think they have someone who then approves it on their end before it goes live, but that we've been able to do that, and that we didn't have that mechanism at the city level to be able to cross promote things the same way. But other than that, I don't have like any kind of other deeper relationships per se. I did have a great conversation with Rick Gordon at the governor's office of broadband, who had some insights for me in terms of how the process worked for getting the funding for the fiber. And then at the top of this call, I was just sort of communicating with Barb and you guys, like some of the stuff that he had communicated to me about how the county's doing a feasibility study. And that's how I learned about the feasibility study. It was not through my other contacts. It was through Rick Gordon at the governor's office of broadband.
Okay, so in the interest, I guess, of time, I don't want to take up anybody's, we could talk here all day. I guess in terms of the action items then is we should, and please, everybody, tell me if I'm wrong, in order to kind of get the bones of this thing going, or get the bones set for these things going. Innovation strategy, adopt open data policies, key performance indexes, grant and access to capital. I mean, we need to plan how we're going to do all of those things. Is that accurate?
I think so. And I can actually just share. I want to share just one. Oh no, it says disabled screen sharing. If I'm able to share, I can show you the one slide where we talk about, what I thought next steps could be in terms of identifying the key performance indicators, if that's helpful.
Shannon, can you let him share his screen?
Yes, let me make him co-host. Hold on 1 second.
Graham, have you ever met Larry Tweel?
I don't think so.
He used to be the Carroll County Economic Development Director, in between Jack Liburn's
Oh, okay.
stints doing it. It was the one time when we actually had a real economic development operation in the county, and worked with the town, with the municipalities, and was doing a good job. But he was doing too good a job, so the commissioners ran him out.
He's at Howard County now?
Yeah, actually, he got an opportunity. They lured him to Howard County. I worked with him in Baltimore County when I worked for the county executive there. He's a great guy.
Once we're able, or maybe once things calm down, we could do a Zoom meeting with him just to get you introduced. He is an incredible. Joe and I have had lunch with him a couple times, and I've built a relationship with him. But he's a great resource, and he's a great collaborator. So I definitely want to get you linked up with him. And obviously, Barb probably knows him pretty well. So if Barb wants to reach out to him about, I think you were going to ask him about facilitators. That would be great, Barb.
Yeah, I'd be happy to do that.
And I've had experience with Howard County from the perspective as being an entrepreneur with a startup, and we received, it was like video lottery terminal funding that was made available through different county economic development departments, and ours was through Howard County. It was a loan program for for small businesses.
And look, also, I think in this strategic planning session, I mean, I feel like what we're hearing, like, where does all this money come from? And like, what are the plans for that? I've talked to you, Graham, about like, all right, what is your grant pipeline? Like, what is your grant sales pipeline look like? Because I'm telling you right now, I mean, you've been watching the budget meetings. The money for us, it is not there in the budget. I mean, if you think, we joke around, like you said, remember we were having lunch, you're like, I need $1 million. Like, well,
yeah.
I'd love to give it to you.
Yeah.
It's just not there. So I mean, that needs to be a real discussion. And certainly I'd like to understand better, like how other, municipalities or other counties, such as Howard, like, where do they come up with this money?
I'm sure they're getting some of it from the state and maybe even federal funding. Also, I would just say, hopefully too, there are municipalities we can kind of compare ourselves to, because I don't know if it's how much it crosses over from county to municipality in terms of borrowing from the same type. Maybe it is just a smaller version of the same type of agenda, but I don't know if there might be other municipalities we can look to.
Okay. Plus, they've got a very different tax base than we do.
Right.
Awfully wealthy as well. So.
Right. And so, there may be things like rural business development stuff that we might have better access to, given our, we have more, I know in terms of the fiber, like Rick was showing me a map of all the unserved areas in Carroll County. And, we have a lot more red splotches of these unserved areas at a county, but that's at county level, and of course, now we have to talk about getting the counties, involved. But in terms of locally here within the city of Westminster, these are the metrics I wanted to this was an example I found of the type of like infographic. So I'm kind of working backwards from a marketing perspective of like, what's the output of all this? Like, what do we want to be able to show? And I figured eventually we'd love to be able to show that whatever we built together was a success, and we have like an infographic that has, you know, these are the things that we measured over time, whether it was local taxable sales, you know, increased wages, local sales tax, property taxes, economic output, how many jobs were created. These are just examples of that a consulting firm put out as like a, you know, the economic KPIs for a town. So I think this is a nice little template that we could look to maybe to kind of figure out what are the things that we can measure or want to measure. And then I just have these bullet points about, you know, I feel like, and maybe this is a secondary or third step in terms of crystallizing the vision itself into a plan, you know, once we've workshopped it more and gotten a facilitator, you know, to help with that process. But I feel like it could encompass fiber, it could encompass promoting the opportunity zone that we have in our, you know, within our boundaries. That's very unique, another unique asset that we've got. And I wasn't sure in terms of the role that the Westminster Town Center Corporation plays in economic development and special projects, like how that could be leveraged, if at all. So that's sort of a question mark from my perspective, is what can be done with that entity.
No, that's an excellent question, and I think it's a valid one. And our consultant partners for economic solutions, which obviously we've kind of put on hold due to this whole COVID-19 situation, was one of the things that we all wanted to do was engage them in that, because looking at the downtown and how we do create, if there's economic incentive zones. And again, I think that should be part of like kind of our strategic planning session on where do we go with that and how would it tie in to Magic. Is there any other thoughts on that? Greg, you were around for that entity itself, but I think PES can really tell us, look, the entity's been kind of dormant for a good decade, you know, if that's accurate. I think PES can tell us how we can better utilize it and then tie that into what we're trying to do here. So any thoughts on that is greatly appreciated.
Yeah, the Town Center Corporation is a great tool that that's available to us. We just need to get it up and running again. You know, we've used it for a lot of things over time. Principally, one of the things that we did that was really terrific with it was redevelopment of the old Farmer Supply site, which is the site that, you know, now is where O'Lorden's and the, you know, the 4-story building next to it and the parking garage all sit right now. You know, we used it to make that happen. Of course, you know, as you know, Graham, you know, there are lots of grants out there that cannot flow directly to governments. For some reason, the way the feds have set it up, they don't want it to go to a government. They want it to go to some other organization. And so we created the Town Center Corporation to be able to receive those grants. And it has, you know, certainly some city members on its board, but the majority of the board has to be non-city people. So that's what keeps it, you know, from being a city entity, so to speak. But, you know, we've received a lot of monies through that over the years when it was active that let us do a lot of different things. In fact, we transferred ownership of, you know, the old stone building to the Town Center Corporation because they could receive some grants that we used to fix up the building, to stabilize it, to make sure it was structurally sound. And then we used the Town Center Corporation to be able to market it. And you know, that was actually the sale to Dave Johansson. It was done by the Town Center Corporation. So lots of things we could do like that. We also used it for a while to, it had some money that had come to it through some different sources, and we used it to manage our facade loan program for a while. And we created sort of a revolving fund that the Town Center Corporation managed, and the monies would, you know, we would loan money out, come back in, would re-loan it, did a lot of good things. So it's a useful tool. It can do a lot of things that we would like it to do and receive monies that would be valuable and access grants. We just need to, you know, get it going again. So, you know, something that we've talked about a lot. We just never have gotten it done yet. But, you know, I think it should be a priority as we, you know, to have it ready and up and running so that when we come out of, you know, the pandemic and things start to reopen, it's available to us.
Well, and one use for it that I was thinking about was, because I'm at Magic, we're talking about creating an angel investing syndicate among, you know, high net worth individuals in Carroll County that are, you know, the sort of quasi impact investing for local businesses, but also, investors who are interested in a return on investment. And as a nonprofit, Magic can't invest. We can't do that. But if, let's say, the city through the Westminster Town Center Corporation, if we were to come to a point where we had like angel syndicate committed to a certain amount of funding to go into local companies or into an accelerator program or local startups, or to bring startups to Westminster, and that there is some amount of matching funding that could come from the city, maybe it goes through the Westminster Town Center Corporation, and that is the entity that's on the cap table, so to speak, for each of those startups that actually could realize a return on investment on behalf of the city as a for-profit corporation. And then those funds could then be redeployed for other special projects.
Sure.
But yeah, I mean, that's kind of where I was thinking of it in terms of why I was thinking of a for-profit entity as a go-between for the city and Magic's efforts in terms of investing in startups and cultivating that startup ecosystem. It's kind of like a TEDCO or when I was in Missouri, the Missouri Technology Corporation. They invested this way on behalf of the states. So taking that example, making it focus on municipal investing. And then I think the other big piece here on this slide is the data piece. Identifying what the metrics are, but then where can we actually get the data? And I think that I assume that's a question for Barb in terms of like who has these data that are represented on this example of this infographic. Like where would we get those data, and which of those data sources are we do we want to track over time, in which case then we develop a plan for monthly whatever updates.
Yeah, it's a good question, Graham. I mean, property tax data, obviously, the city receives, unlike since you and I both spent time in Missouri, sales taxes in Maryland are not a municipal function. So truthfully, I'd have to sort of look to see how granular that data is, because it's not as if we receive sales taxes. So I can certainly check with our finance director, but some of these pieces we likely wouldn't have. That the city's capturing, that doesn't mean that somebody else at a different level of government isn't capturing it. I would just need to look into that.
Yeah.
Graham, when we're talking about this, before actually we get done with this slide, since you've got your presentation up, would you be able to bring up the slide for the program metrics in the grant once the group is ready to move past this one? Yeah, that's the one, Graham. Thank you.
Sure, no problem. Yeah, and I'm happy to revisit these metrics too, in terms of what is it that the city wants to see from Magic, in terms of Magic's performance. But then I wasn't sure, if Magic does have a role in the economic development plan, whatever that may be, if those metrics would be part of this, or if that would be a completely separate, set of KPIs, measuring a different outcome.
So one of the things I think with any metric is you need to have kind of a goal on what you're trying to, accomplish. Because you could say, okay, well, we got $10,000 of revenue. You're like, okay, great. But how does that compare to what your actual goal is? All right. So, I mean, Graham, if I'm you, I'm thinking of, all right, how do I back myself in? How do I set, back these numbers into the goal? And I mean, look, how are we going to become self-sustaining? What are realistic numbers to set? I mean, I'm wondering if those goals come within the strategic planning process. Certainly, I'd like to add metric on here instead of grant applications, like actual grant pipeline dollar amounts. How much do you have in the pipeline? And I'm not saying that I know exactly what those goals are, because I'm not an economic development professional. I think that needs some more digging into. I'm not a big conferences and events. I don't see like conferences and events attended. I don't see how that really, impacts Westminster. I mean, those are just kind of feel good metrics, I think, frankly. I'd certainly like anybody else's thoughts on that.
So there was some history on that when we made up these metrics. And Ben, I'm not sure if you were around for this conversation.
I can assure you I was not.
So part of the conversation we had was that as you know, Magic was playing a role. Magic at the time was attending a lot of regional conferences, that were focused on technology, in the area and bringing together technology, entrepreneurs and leaders of different types, major businesses. And these were the very early days of the fiber network. And our goal at the time was to make sure that people who led big companies in the region, make sure that they knew that, hey, not very far away in Westminster, they built this fiber network, which, they should really check out because they might want to have some people located here or a facility located here. And so we really wanted to get the word out about that. So the metric was built around where are you going? And when you go, are you publicizing the fiber network and making sure that people are aware of it? And Barb will remember this. We wanted to make sure that there was some kind of promotional material available, to do this. And Barb found some brochures that had been made up that were actually dated even when she found them, that talked about the fiber network. And we said, well, this is a good start, but we really need to, and you can pass these out, but we really need to update these and really do a better job of kind of selling the network in the city. And I don't know that update ever took place, but that was the idea at the time, was that we wanted to get the network promoted out there and make sure people were aware of it. And there still is too little awareness of it, so it's still a valid goal, I think. But whether conferences attended is the way to measure it, I don't know. But it was one of the things that was concrete at the time that we could talk about.
I do think, Ben, I think we were around when we came up with this, because I remember the conversation. I think the conversation was, until we could measure results, we wanted to measure as much activity as we could. And I do think Greg threw out the conference events attended, hosted as a metric. We were all sitting there trying to come up with some metrics. Because I remember that was part of the conversation where I said, I want to see if a new business is located here because of something Magic did, but I want that separated by, in city limits and outside city limits. It was all part of that same conversation. So I think at the time it was, all right, if we can't really measure true results, or maybe it hasn't been long enough to get results, we wanted to measure activity. And that was just one of the things that was thrown out, if I remember all that correctly.
Yeah, I think that's rough. I think that's about it. Yeah.
One of the, this has come up for me as I apply for grants, because, I have to be able to show some track record of success when it comes to like creating jobs. If I'm applying for a rural business development grant with the USDA, it's all about creating jobs. I have to be able to show them what our track record is. In terms of, Magic's been around for 4 years now. A lot of the workforce development is being done with middle schoolers and high schoolers. So they're only just now starting to get to the age where they're, entering the workforce if they were involved in Magic's programs 4 years ago. So I think some of it, there is sort of a sales cycle. I don't know, I put it in those terms, but in terms of that tail, there's that tail of maybe 4 more years to measuring the success of some of the workforce development stuff. It's not as immediate necessarily. So that's hard to attribute, because then it's, you start to lose track of people over time, and it's hard to keep up with some of them. So that's on Magic, obviously, to kind of figure that out. Like, how do we stay in touch with people to be able to show that there was a pathway that Magic created that went from education to job, or from, promotion of Ting and fiber to bringing a business here, because some of these efforts are kind of very broad, and we don't necessarily know everyone that we've reached. or have a contact with them necessarily. Hopefully we do. And that's obviously part of our job, is to make sure we have that stickiness to get that information in.
So if I can make a comment about that metric and going back to letting regional companies know that we're here, I certainly don't think that that's the major strategy that what I'm hearing from Graham we want to do. Because look, relocation of companies, as even Robert pointed out before he left the council, doesn't create more jobs necessarily. I mean, I think the startups and then the current companies here who are in the scale up phases are the ones that are going to create jobs and growth. So if I'm looking at metrics, to me, I'm saying to myself, who can we identify 50 companies that break them into employee levels, 0 to 10, 25 to 100, 100 to 150, and then fostering those relationships over the next couple of years to see what they need and make them aware of what magic is. Because frankly, I've got customers that they are in the tech field that don't they don't know, so I'd certainly like to see a metric that involves this, saying, okay, how many businesses did we meet with, and then you can develop with us or with your board 125 or 100 businesses that fall into those categories that you're meeting with, that you're building those relationships with, and saying, okay, because then when you've got your 10 guys that are 10 individuals that come out of Carroll Community College or come out of a hackathon event that are needing internships, you can place them with those businesses, as opposed to this, well, let's just throw out marketing material about how we have this fiber. I don't see that being that effective. And please push back if you disagree.
Well, I would just add to that I think the promotion of fiber as a completely separate line item, so to speak, is something that I think, and you guys have already talked about it in your workshops over the past couple of weeks, is something that I think the city should also be engaged in. It almost demands its own budget, in terms of, Magic's overall operating budget is less than $200,000 a year, and that includes my salary. So it's doesn't leave a lot for us to do any kind of real campaigning or advertising for the fiber network, especially after all is said and done with all the sort of workforce development stuff that we do as a nonprofit.
Which by the way, that's a good place to pivot real quick to the mayor. And also, Graham, I want to say that I understand what you were saying about the sales pipeline of these workforce development. And in fact, the workforce development is a huge component to economic development. And I've always agreed with Magic's doing that. I think that's really important. But then retaining that workforce, I think, frankly, falls a little bit on the city as well, investing in our services, investing in Main Street, which I believe that we're doing. So pivoting real quick, look, I know we're kind of been on here for an hour. I didn't know how much we blocked, but I think that's a good maybe pivot point that, Joe, if you want to talk, and I've communicated this to you about the reallocation of funds to promote the network itself. So maybe could you touch on that so I have a better understanding?
So, I've been talking about it, and one of the things that I'd like to point out is that my plan would be, so if it was just me and I was making all the decisions and I was running the plan, what I would do is really only do it for a couple of years, right? I think in terms of marketing and advertising fiber as a service here in the city, that does largely fall on Ting, because it's their brand, it's their marketing, they're the ones servicing the customers directly and so forth. But I think what the city could do better, and what we can do is run an awareness campaign for a couple of years and just be in people's faces about what we have, the solutions it provides, the problems that it solves, and so forth. Because there's still people that don't really understand what's available and what it can do, and there are some things that are easier sold than not. Everyone knows about bandwidth. It'll be a very hard thing to market, but I think one of the biggest benefits of fiber is it's low latency. I mean, that's a lot of education that you have to market. That's a tough thing to do. But if you have a couple of years, you certainly can throw that in the mix. I mean, people don't realize the difference between bandwidth and latency. And the way I always describe it is, you know, if you have a giant water pipe, bandwidth is the size of the pipe. It's how much water can come through per second. But latency is how fast the water actually moves from point A to point B. So with big data, when you're talking about downloading a giant file that's gigabytes worth of data, bandwidth is the most important factor. But when you're doing small things that use a little bit of data, the big factor is really latency and how fast things are moving back and forth. With copper, it's moving at the speed of electricity, which is a very, very, very small or very, very low speed compared to the speed of light, which is literally how fast it's moving on fiber. And one of the things that made me cringe, and I know it didn't make that big of a difference, but when I first got in, one of the marketing pieces the city had, it talked about the fiber network and it says fast as lightning, and I was like, no, it's so much faster than lightning, guys. But I mean, I no one who picks that up, but to me, that mattered. So it's one of those things where there's just a lot of misconceptions about who can get it, the process, who built the network, who services it. And I think if we clear that up and just literally, and you know, people move here and they haven't, you know, they missed all the buzz. And then where was the buzz? I don't know what segments of the market we missed, but there are people that just don't get it and don't understand it because they haven't had it in front of them. And I think putting it in front of them for a couple of years, just like a very like broad net, simple awareness branding campaign for the fiber network and the availability of gigabit fiber, I think could do us justice. And I'm not talking about spending a ton of money. I'm talking about spending a small amount of money, at least in terms of a marketing budget for something this size over a couple of years, and then let Ting just go back to rolling with it all on their own. But I also don't want to step on toes there. They have a brand that they're trying to advertise, so there's a way to do that. But that's what I've been talking about doing.
Joe,
especially the business. A lot of businesses don't really understand the total benefits of it. They don't understand the benefit of, most businesses now are on voice over IP, and they don't understand how much better that works over fiber than it does over copper networks. It's not.
Joe, how do we procure those services?
Oh, like marketing services?
Yeah. I mean, Barb, maybe that's a question for you.
Well, so I mean, what I'm suggesting us do is we can certainly, I think that the amount would be at a place where we could use it as a professional service, and because it's really hard to bid out marketing. Marketing is going to come in. You're going to want the personality to fit. But I mean, what I'm willing to do is volunteer my own time to manage it. And so we're not paying an agency 20% of what we're spending or more, 20 to 30% of what we're spending. If we just do what I was talking about, which is $24,000 a year, that's only $2,000 a month. We don't want to, it's awareness branding campaign is simple. It's there's not a whole lot of micromanaging campaigns once they're up and running. You kind of want to have a few different concepts and let them run. But the city can internally, and by internally, I mean, I'll sit there and push the buttons, manage Google and Facebook and Instagram campaigns that would spread awareness, and 100% of the budget could go toward the channel. So if let's say we're doing Facebook and Google, all $2,000 worth can go to those two things instead of it being 1,500 of it.
Right.
But look, if everyone wants to, hey, maybe you guys don't like my style of marketing and we want to go with somebody else that, and pay that fee, that's fine too. I would budget a little bit more then. I would toss it another 20, 25% to have to pay someone to manage it. So I think anything under 2,000 probably wouldn't be as strong of a showing. I think that's kind of where we want to land.
Okay. All right. Other than that, so if maybe I could kind of recap like our action items on what we're going to do. Barb was going to try to talk to Larry Tweel to get maybe some facilitator options. She was going to look into maybe how the data can be accessed. Graham, I actually sent you the Howard County Economic Development Plan. I think I did. Take a look at it. It's very interesting. I've referred to that over the last 2 years many times when discussing this. I would start thinking about city list of business stakeholders within the city of Westminster, and kind of do it like large, medium, small. I mean, and you'll see that that's exactly what Howard County did in their plan. I'll work with you to identify those stakeholders. Joe, you'll continue to, I guess, I mean, I'm fine with the idea of you managing the marketing, obviously making, I think in terms of like a transparency thing, making sure all the money, I know it will between you and I, but making sure it goes into all the marketing, like the city. I don't know if you set up a city account, how that works, but I mean, I'm comfortable with it if the committee's comfortable with it. And Greg, you just keep providing us guidance on with your wisdom from years of experience. No, I'm joking, Greg. I just didn't know, Greg, if you wanted to bring any more thoughts about the Town Center Corporation working better together with Magic. I think that should be part of the strategic planning session. And then, if you had any more thoughts on strategic planning initiatives, I'd love to hear that too.
Yeah. Well, I know that Alyssa's got a lot on her plate, with what we ask of her as well as, her other challenges. And, but I think that, we need to, add a task to her list. There's some work she needs to do for us to be able to relaunch the Town Center Corporation. So I think, we need to work that into the, into her, her list of things we need to get done, somewhere along the line here soon, and get that, get that started up again so it's ready for us. And think about who, I know Joe's given us a lot of thought, maybe I think talk to some people about it, but get a list together of who we want to see be those private sector members of the board, and clear the way to getting them on, so we can get that done.
And Graham, you'll send me a list of the strategic advisor members of your board, you call them?
Yeah, the Stakeholders Council. Yep.
Yeah. I wouldn't mind seeing a metric of stakeholder financial commitment to Magic. It doesn't have to be by name, but if you've got 40 or 20 stakeholders, normally you'd have an investment from them because they believe in the mission. So I wouldn't mind seeing that.
We don't have that requirement for this particular body, but
I wouldn't necessarily suggest it was a requirement, although there are organizations that do have requirements, and I'm not suggesting that. What I'm suggesting is adding the metric of what have the stakeholders invested in Magic, because I think that's fair.
Yeah, no, that's a good point.
But one other thing I would say, I think, when we look at, the list of, Graham's board and the stakeholders and, people that we might want to include in economic development, through the Town Center Corporation, and, maybe there's a few other, key, business leaders in the community that we could engage with. That's a good group to put together to have this session.
Well, yeah, and I mean, part of what I've created in terms of that presentation and how it kind of has evolved into a focus on like autonomy, for example, is the result of having stakeholders in town that are engaged in that industry. So I think there are a lot of strengths that we have. I think there are things that we can do in this plan that will play to the strengths of these stakeholders and to our infrastructure with fiber.
Yeah,
cool.
Sure.
Great. So I think we all have our assignments here. In terms of timeline, I mean, I'd certainly like to regroup within the next couple weeks, maybe in the beginning of June. Does that sound fair to you all?
Sure.
Barb, does that give you enough time? I know you've got a bazillion things going on, just to make a couple phone calls.
Yeah, no, that won't be any problem at all, Ben. And I would suggest, like I say, I already actually sent an email about Howard County, so that shouldn't be that difficult. Maybe, Ben, at our meeting in early June, maybe in the interim, I did write down a couple notes about comments, Ben, you in particular had about possible grant metrics. I would just suggest that the committee maybe give some thought to that, and if we schedule a meeting for the first week of June, maybe we can try to finalize that so I can get a grant agreement on one of your meeting agendas in June.
If that's enough time, yeah, I think that's fair.
Yeah. Okay. And in response to Greg's comment, we did have some conversation with Alyssa. Tammy and I did, and I'm not sure when it was. Everything's been a blur for all of us, I think, the last couple months. But Tammy, Alyssa, and I had spoken sometime earlier this year, I believe it was, about what needed to happen to kind of reinvigorate the Town Center Corporation. So I'll just refresh my memory on that. It's been a while since the three of us talked about it. I know one of the steps is Tammy had to, file some type of report with the state, which she did. But I'll go through and dust off my notes on that and send something to you guys later this week.
Yeah, and Alyssa has the bylaws, and we can look at those and figure out how we what steps we need to take since it's been in abeyance for a while. I mean, I remember when I came back on the council at one point, we just needed to get some, like the last time we filed a report, I think, before the years that we hadn't done it again. I had to go chase down Jake Yingling and get him to sign the last chair of it. And, but that's been years now. So I know Jake's health isn't very good these days. So I don't even know if he's available to do that kind of thing anymore.
All right, so I think we have a game plan. Thank you very much. Thanks, Graham. I think this has been a productive meeting. We've got action items, so we'll regroup in the first week of June. Barb, maybe do we want to just throw something on the calendar now? I think that's fair.
Sure.
Okay.
I'm pretty good. Same time, roughly. Greg, I know your schedule's kind of in flux with your new position. You can.
Well, if we plan out, that far in advance, when are we talking about?
Week of June 1st, I guess. It would be literally 3 weeks from today.
Yeah, so Tuesday the 2nd?
Right.
Okay. Same time for everybody?
It works for me if it works for everybody else, Joe.
Yep, works for me.
Great.
Yeah, that's fine.
Greg, what about you? Because your schedule's a little bit more difficult, I think, than everybody else's.
Yeah, I think I can do that.
Okay, so I'll send a meeting invite out, okay?
Great, thank you.
All right, great. So thanks, everybody. Appreciate the
All
time.
right, talk to you all later.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks. Bye.